TJ Technologies is proud to sponsor today's Farm Basics. Micronutrients are essential for healthy and productive growth in lawns, gardens, and crops. Check us out at tjmicromix.com because it's the little things that make a big difference.
During our Farm Basics time today, we wanted to talk a little about late season insects and pre-harvest intervals. What is a pre-harvest interval?
I'm just watching that mosquito land on your forehead, Brian, thinking, bug control is still important late in the season, but the problem is harvest is coming up really soon. And when we talk about pre-harvest intervals, what that means is the time that an insecticide must be sprayed on before harvest. So it's safe to harvest. There won't be any chemical residue or anything like that on the seed that you're harvesting as long as you meet the pre-harvest intervals.
Okay, so we talk about these pre-harvest intervals, but we could go to a vegetable crop, like let's say it's tomatoes or some other crop in the garden that we would have right behind us, and we could spray a particular insecticide on that crop a day before we harvest, yet in soybeans it might be 21 days before harvest. Why the difference?
Well, that is a good question, and it's kind of interesting because that same product may have different pre-harvest intervals in a number of different crops. And the reason why is the chemical companies have to do a lot of testing to prove this pre-harvest interval. Now, in soybeans, they may say, look, nobody sprays within 2 or 3 weeks before harvest, so we only need a pre-harvest interval of 21 days. But if we're talking about tomatoes, wow, those guys might harvest that crop tomorrow, so we better do all the testing we need to get a 1-day pre-harvest interval.
Yeah, it really comes down to the residue testing that the big chemical companies have to run in order to get things through the EPA or FDA or whoever they need to get approvals from, and it costs millions of dollars. So if they have to get a narrow pre-harvest window, in other words, a 1-day pre-harvest interval, it just costs them a lot more money to get all the testing done. Okay, so what insects would we be spraying for in the late season that this would even come up, that this would even be an issue?
Well, it's a big deal
other
this
than
year.
The mosquitoes landing.
Well, mosquitoes are one thing, but you look at major crop damaging insects like grasshoppers, for example, they're oftentimes very bad this late in the season. And this year, I know a number of people from different areas in the country have said, wow, we're driving down the road and we can hardly drive with all these grasshoppers, especially guys riding motorcycles. What trouble would you have when you had grasshoppers flying up and smacking into your helmet or into your windshield on a motorcycle?
But the problem is when grasshoppers develop wings, that means they're in the adult stage and they're laying eggs. And so unless you got them a little bit earlier in the season, they've probably already laid eggs, so you're most likely due to have a major infestation next year.
That's true, but they can still do a lot of defoliation late in the season, and that's when the crop is putting the last few pounds of test weight on or increasing that size of the seed. If you damage all that leaf tissue, it can still take something off your yield.
Well, what I look for is a bug like bean leaf beetles that literally can cut the pods off a soybean plant, and the pods drop on the ground and now you can't harvest it. So that's one that we on our farm have sprayed for late in the season in the past. But there are a number of other insects out there, and I guess we just wanted to make sure that you understand if you're a farmer, you got to pay attention to what the pre-harvest interval is on a product you use, and if you're a non-farmer, you need to understand that the reason why we have these pre-harvest intervals is just to make sure that our food is safe that's going to be out in that supply chain.
Well, the great thing is for farmers now, they've got a lot of different insecticides to choose from. They have several different families of insecticides to choose from, so different types of chemistry. So as we get later in the season, maybe you have a problem like grasshoppers, for example, and you say, wow, my favorite product is X, but ooh, the pre-harvest interval doesn't work. Well, guess what? You can choose product Y, and it may have a pre-harvest interval that works. It still gets the job done. It may be a slightly different product than a farmer's used to using, but there are plenty of choices right now to control just about any bug we've got.
Well, it is important to control insects. If a farmer wants to have good crops, it's also important to control weeds, especially if you've got our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?